Hello.
Ah,
Hi, Lauren.
you made it back.
Oh, wow. Are you back in LA already?
Yeah,
Wow.
she was in Owens Valley as of even like 1 o'clock.
3 hours ago.
Yeah, just 2 hours
Wow.
ago. Oh, you're muted, Lauren. We're enjoying watching your lips move.
Yeah, we made it back in the nick of time. I literally just got out of the car.
Oh, my God.
Whoa.
But I've got some fresh grapefruit juice, so this ought to help you.
That's
Nice.
good.
Good to see all of you.
You too.
Good to see you.
Likewise.
It's at the same temperature in LA as it is in Owens Valley.
Oh my gosh,
Really?
it's so hot.
Yeah.
But Jen said it was like in the 90s, but that's maybe not where you are, right, Lauren? Are you in the 90s over there?
Yeah,
Okay.
Wow.
but it's supposed to bounce down tomorrow again.
Yep, we're supposed to lose like 15 degrees.
Oh, right. It was in the 90s today. Gosh, that's why it felt so warm.
I left my embroidery up there though.
Oh,
But I have my crow.
Okay. So I'm going to feature tonight this jack-o'-lantern mushroom.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, it's Melinda Ring.
Oh my
So
God,
all the way
that's
from New York City.
so beautiful.
It's
That
gorgeous.
yellow stitching, amazing.
Yeah, it really is. And this texture in here, yeah.
Wow, that's
Wow.
pretty. Are we ready? Should we let folks in?
Let's
one
do it.
second. I want to test the mushroom video time lapse just to make sure.
Okay.
That doesn't look good. What are you seeing?
Nothing.
Nothing. Just says you started sharing a screen.
So weird. Okay. Let me,
Can you pick on the website?
let me turn everything else off. It's weird because it doesn't seem like it likes sharing full screen things. Let's do it this way. That.
Nice message.
What?
Cindy just sent a message to the chat of everybody saying we're letting them in a minute.
Okay. Now what do you see?
Now we see it.
Still
Yeah.
black.
Green.
Now if I full screen it?
Yeah, I still see
Oh,
it.
there.
Okay, so that's what I'll do. I'll start with it not in full screen and then go to full screen. Okay,
Sounds good.
good.
That's interesting that it doesn't like you to start in full screen.
Yeah. I'm gonna turn off all the other things. We're starting at page 151, right, James?
Yes.
So those 2 pages and then skip over, well, we'll show the
Let's show
images
the
and then
picture.
all the
Yep.
way to 163 is our end point.
Yeah.
And I would say, you know, if you feel, James or Jaime, that you want to continue or whatever, keep going. Like when you, like if you feel like we could go a little longer, you don't,
Sure.
just feel free.
Okay.
Is it, oh, Rich found my phone.
Oh, you found it.
Are we ready, guys? Should we let folks in?
Maybe let's mute Lauren
Wait.
and then.
Wait till Lauren's off.
All right, thanks for checking though. Bye.
Yeah, I'm just gonna keep ringing it.
All right,
No, don't ring it.
sorry.
Let's make
Block-
sure. If he rings it during this
Mute you.
talk, then it's going to keep on ringing inside our Zoom.
If she's muted, it won't. We won't hear it.
If she's muted, you won't.
If
Are we
you're
ready
talking-
then?
If you're talking to us, we couldn't hear you.
for looking. I
Oh.
appreciate it.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
I don't know what happened to it. I don't see how it's gone.
I know,
It doesn't make any fucking sense.
I know. I have a talent. My superpower.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Bye. Why would my phone be ringing on my computer?
Because he's calling you through FaceTime audio, and it'll connect to any device that's on your iCloud account.
Oh, okay. All right. I think we're ready to go then.
All right, here we go.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. As people are signing in right now, we're going to go and back to where we were featuring embroideries of the week. And this week, I have an embroidery all the way from New York City. It is from Melinda Ring, and it is a jack-o'-lantern mushroom. And if you look, one of the things I think is so beautiful is the tones of the kind of the pink and maroon and the yellow that really give, James, what is that called underneath the mushroom? That part?
Gills.
The gills. Thank you. So this is Melinda's, and then I'm Jen. I'm calling in from Studio City, and what we'll do right now is we'll just kind of introduce each other, where we're calling in from, and what we're working on tonight. So I am working on the underground pattern. Last week I started with the nematode, and this week I don't know exactly what I'm working on, but I'm on a roll. So I use she, her pronouns, and I am going to pass it to Maria.
Maria, you're on mute.
Take your mute.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Maria in LA, and she, her, and I am working on beading. I'm actually planning a piece I want to make, and I'm going to I'm trying to find exact diameters of beads that I need in the right colors. That's what I'm doing. Oh, and I pass it on to Cynthia.
Hi, I'm Cynthia. I'm calling from West Covina, and I'll be working on my bird embroidery. Oh, you can't see it. I'll show it at the end of the session, and I'll be listening in today. Thank you. Oh, I'll pass it on to Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm calling in from West Los Angeles, and I'm not quite sure what I'm going to be working on. I have something kind of in the mix starting, and we'll see what it evolves into. I forgot to pass it off. I'll pass it off to Sylvia.
Thank you. I'm Sylvia. I'm calling from Pasadena. I use she, her pronouns. I'm working on white sage. And I will pass it on to Joni.
Excuse me. Good afternoon, everyone. I recently received my beautiful raven. I'm one that studies the bird. I've been looking at all these photos because they have so much personality, and I'm trying to match threads and get some stitches down so then I can work on my project. But I'm one of those kind that has to look at it for a while. But anyway, I'm here listening in from LA. And I will pass it to Emily. No, wait a minute, Emily already spoke. How about Lauren? Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Tony. My name's Lauren. I use she, her pronouns. I'm calling from Topanga. I'm working on a not so common raven. And happy to be here tonight. And I will pass it on to Izzy. Where are you, Izzy?
I'm right here. Hi, Lauren. I'm Izzy. My pronouns are she, they. I'm here with my mom. Hi, I'm Jane. My pronouns are she, her. And we're calling from DC. We're gonna be packing up an apartment, so that's our mending tonight. And I pass it on to how about Alex? So I don't think he's there. How about Luis? Lois? Sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce.
Hi, Lois. It's Lois. Hi. I'm new and I just got my permit. And I'll pass it on to Jamie.
Yeah, hi, my name is Jaime. He, him pronouns. I up in the Owens Valley in Lone Pine, and I'll be sharing the screen tonight with the reading. And I'll pass it on to Derainer.
Hi, I'm Derainer calling in from Baldwin Hills. I go by she, her pronoun, and I am still working on my native sunflower. I think I'll finish it up soon though. And I will pass it on to Caroline.
Hello, good evening. My name is Caroline. I'm calling from Studio City and I will be mending tonight. And I'll pass it to James. Did you speak already?
Hi, everybody. I'm James, he, him pronouns. Won't be working on anything tonight because I'll be helping with the reading and the questions tonight, but very excited for tonight's reading. And I will pass it to Alex.
Hey everyone, excited to be here. I'm here in Los Angeles and I'm still working on my mallow. I want to get this done though, committed. It's getting there.
That's the way to go.
Really looking forward to this.
Go, Alex.
Thank you all. Who's left? Let's see. Sylvia, did you go? If anyone hasn't gone, you could go. I think.
I don't think Michelle has gone yet. Oh, Misha, on mute.
Yes. Hi, Michelle, he, him. I'm in Highland Park. And tonight I'll try to finish something that's very small and that is exchanging food with other creatures around. I don't know if you can see, it's that. And let's see, Emily, did you go?
I did already, thank you.
I think I'll take over at this point, and if you didn't have an opportunity to introduce yourself, there will be more time at the end. The Metabolic Studios Learning and Mending series is now in its 4th evolution. This time around, we are addressing disturbance ecology and what emerges in the blasted landscapes of capitalism. To do this, we will be collectively reading Anna Tsing's The Mushroom at the End of the World on the possibility of life in capitalist ruins. Growing through the last 3 gatherings, the first learning syllabus in response to ongoing racial violence, particularly at the hands of the police, the second holding space for the mega fires that have consumed the West, and the third addressing the larger reality of suffocation and the need for us to revive our breath. In order to get a deeper understanding of these crises and how they're interconnected, we're building upon the readings in the last 3 series. Many of you have received embroidery kits from us of native plants representing the food and medicine that Metabolic Studio is cultivating. We are adding some new embroidery patterns. We also have more native plants and bird patterns available too. The theme of all the embroideries we've been working towards is biosynosis, which is an association of diverse organisms forming a closely integrated community. If you haven't received an embroidery kit and would like one, please send your name and mailing address to info@metabolicstudio.org, and Cindy will put that address in the chat bar. We've decided to close the entrance to the Zoom space after the first 15 minutes of the reading to protect the flow and to keep a steady breath. These gatherings are being recorded through Zoom for archival purposes. We thank you for co-creating this opportunity to learn and to mend together during quarantine. Tonight, we'll read page 151 through 163, The Mushroom at the End of the World by Anna Tsing. This 10-week series will focus solely on one book, and our guiding question is, what lives in the ruins we've made? Since the ongoing pandemic began, we have moved our weekly public studio practice to Zoom, where we've committed ourselves to learning and mending together. We invite you to receive these readings as a deep inhale, and we find that crafting together helps to receive these readings as a meditation. We will share our screen, and we encourage you to read a section of the text aloud with us. When there is a pause in the reading, please feel free to unmute yourself and begin where the last person left off. Silence is golden, and there is no pressure to fill the transitional spaces while we enjoy a breath and continue crafting. Feel free to jump in and continue reading at your comfort level. You don't have to read, it's also fine to enjoy listening. And now we can start the reading. I pass it to James. I'm sharing.
Hi, everybody. So like last week, the tradition we'll be doing now is giving the reading questions before we begin reading, and then just so we have them in our mind during the reading, and we can come up with some answers at the end. So this week we have 4 questions. The first one is, and I'll put these in the chat after, given that disturbance is part of ecology, can you share your observations where disturbance has been restorative? The second question is, how do we tell stories about landscapes? The third question is, have you created stories about landscapes you encounter? Who are the protagonists, both human and non-human? And the last question is, Anna Tsing is telling a story with mushrooms and nematodes as protagonists. Who is a non-human protagonist you either weave a story with or would like to see a story told about? And with that, we can start the reading.
I'm happy to start off. Just to sort of remind people, we take it to read when we want to read, and just pick up where the last person left off if you feel like it. When Kato-san introduced me to the work he was doing for the Prefectural Forest Research Service to restore the forest, I was shocked. As an American tutored in wilderness sensibilities, I thought forests were best at restoring themselves. Kato-san disagreed. If you want matsutake in Japan, he explained, you must have pine. And if you want pine, you must have human disturbance. He was supervising work to remove broadleaf trees from the hillside, he showed me. Even the topsoil had been carted away, and the steep slope now looked gouged and bare to my American eyes. Hold on one sec, I'm getting my phone back. Where was it?
It was in your backpack.
Thank you.
It was in your, but John helped me.
Sorry.
John made the thing go.
Sorry, everybody.
Okay.
Cell phone emergency. Thank you, Rich. Kato-san disagreed. If you want pine, you must have human disturbance. He was supervising work to remove broadleaf trees from the hillside, he showed me. Even gouged and bare to my American eyes. What about erosion, I asked. Erosion is good, he answered. Now I was really startled. Isn't erosion, the loss of soil, always bad? Still, I was willing to listen. Pine flourishes on mineral soils and erosion uncovers them. Working with forest managers in Japan changed how I thought about the role of disturbance in forests. Deliberate disturbance to revitalize forests surprised me. Kato-san was not planting a garden. The forest he hoped for would have to grow itself, but he wanted to help it along by creating a certain kind of mess, a mess that would advantage pine. Kato-san's work engages with a popular and scientific cause, restoring Satoyama woodlands. Satoyama are traditional peasant landscapes combining rice agriculture and water management with woodlands. The woodlands, the heart of the Satoyama concept, were once disturbed and thus maintained through their use for firewood and charcoal making, as well as non-timber forest products. Today, the most valuable product of the Satoyama woodland is matsutake. To restore woodlands for matsutake encourages a suite of other living things, pines and oaks, understory herbs, insects, birds. Restoration requires disturbance, but disturbance to enhance diversity and the healthy functioning of ecosystems. Some kinds of ecosystems, advocates argue, flourish with human activities.
Ecological restoration programs around the world use human action to rearrange natural landscapes. What distinguishes Satoyama revitalization for me is the idea that human activities should be part of the forest in the same way as non-human activities. Humans, pines, matsutake, and other species should all make the landscape together in this project. One Japanese scientist explained matsutake as the result of unintentional cultivation, because human disturbance makes the presence of matsutake more likely, despite the fact that humans are entirely incapable of cultivating the mushroom. Indeed, one could say that pines, matsutake, and humans all cultivate each other unintentionally. They make each other's world-making projects possible. This idiom has allowed me to consider how landscapes, more generally, are products of unintentional design. That is, the overlapping world-making activities of many agents, human and not human. The design is clear in the landscape's ecosystem, but none of the agents have planned for this effect. Humans join others in making landscapes of unintentional design. As sites for more than human dramas, landscapes are radical tools for decentering human hubris. Landscapes are not backdrops for historical action. They are themselves active. Watching landscapes in formation show humans joining other living beings in shaping worlds. Matsutake and pine don't just grow in forests, they make forests. Matsutake forests are gatherings that build and transform landscapes. This part of the book begins with disturbance, and I make disturbance a beginning, that is, an opening for action. Disturbance realigns possibilities for transformative encounter. Landscape patches emerge from disturbance. Thus, precarity is enacted in more than human sociality. I can read the, oh, I was going to read the caption for the photo. Active landscape. Kyoto Prefecture, Satayama Forest in December. Sometimes the life of the forest is most evident as it bursts through obstacles. Farmers chop, winter chills, life still breaks through.
"11. The life of the forest. To walk attentively through a forest, even a damaged one, is to be caught by the abundance of life, ancient and new, underfoot and reaching into the light. But how does one tell the life of the forest? We might begin by looking for drama and adventure beyond the activities of humans. Yet we are not used to reading stories without human heroes. This is the puzzle that informs this section of the book. Can I show a landscape as the protagonist of an adventure in which humans are only one kind of participant? Over the past few decades, many kinds of scholars have shown that allowing only human protagonists into our stories is not just ordinary human bias, it is a cultural agenda tied to dreams of progress through modernization. There are other ways of making worlds. Anthropologists have become interested, for example, in how subsistence hunters recognize other living beings as person, that is, protagonists of stories. Indeed, how could it be otherwise? Yet expectation of progress block this insight. Talking animals are for children and primitives. Their voice is silent. We imagine well-being without them. We trample over them for our advancement. We forget that collaborative survival requires cross-species coordination. To enlarge what is possible, we need other kinds of stories, including adventures of landscapes. One place to begin is a nematode and a thesis on livability. Call me Bursphalanchus xylophilus. I'm a tiny worm-like creature, a nematode, and I spend most of my time crunching the insides of pine trees. But my kin are as well-traveled as any whaler sailing the seven seas. Stick with me, and I'll tell you about some curious voyages. But wait, who would want to hear about the world from a worm? That was, in effect, the question addressed by Jacob Uskal in 1934 when he described the world experienced by a tick. Working with the tick's sensory abilities, such as its ability to detect the heat of a mammal and thus a potential blood meal, Uskal showed that a tick knows and makes worlds. His approach brought landscapes to life as scenes of sensuous activity. Creatures were not to be treated as inert objects, but as knowing subjects. And yet Uskal's idea of affordances limited his tick to the bubble-like world of its new senses. Caught in a small frame of space and time, it was not a participant in the wider rhythms and histories of the landscape. This is not enough, as the voyages of Persiphalanchus xylophilus, the pine, wilt, nematode, attest. Consider one of the most colorful.
Pine wilt nematodes are unable to move from tree to tree without the help of pine sower beetles, who carry them without benefit to themselves. At a particular stage in a nematode's life, it may take advantage of a beetle's journey to hop on as a stowaway. But this is not a casual transaction. Nematodes must approach beetles in a particular stage of the beetle's life cycle, just as they are about to emerge from their piney cavities to move to a new tree. The nematodes ride in the beetle's trachea. When beetles move to a new tree to lay their eggs, the nematodes slip into the new tree's wound. This is an extraordinary feat of coordination in which nematodes tap into the beetle's life rhythms. To immerse oneself in such webs of coordination, Uexküll bubble worlds are not enough. Despite this sojourn with a nematode, I have not abandoned Matsutake. A major reason for the current rarity of Matsutake in Japan is the demise of pines that results from the habits of pine wilt nematodes. Just as whalers catch whales, pine wilt nematodes catch pines and kill them and their fungal companions. Still, nematodes were not always involved in this way of making a living. Just as for whalers and whales, nematodes become killers of pines only through the contingencies of circumstance and history. Their voyage into Japanese history is as extraordinary as the webs of coordination they weave. Pine wilt nematodes are only a minor pest for American pines, which evolved with them. These nematodes became tree killers when they traveled to Asia, where pines were unprepared and vulnerable. Amazingly, ecologists have traced this process rather precisely. The first nematodes disembarked at Japan's Nagasaki harbor from the United States in the first decade of the 20th century, riding in American pine. Timber was a resource for industrializing Japan, where elites were hungry for resources from around the world. Many uninvited guests arrived with those resources, including pine wilt nematodes. Soon after its arrival, it traveled with local pine sawyer beetles. Its moves can be traced concentrically out from Nagasaki. Together, the local beetle and the foreign nematode changed Japan's forest landscapes. Still, an infected pine might not die if it's living in good conditions. And this indeterminate threat thus holds Matsutake, implicated as collateral damage, in suspense. Pines stressed by forest crowding, lack of light, and too much soil enrichment are easy prey for nematodes. Evergreen broadleaf trees crowd and shade Japanese pine. Blue stained fungus sometimes grow in pine's wounds, feeding the nematodes. The warmer temperatures of anthropogenic climate change help the nematodes to spread. Many histories come together here. They draw us beyond bubble worlds into shifting cascades of collaboration and complexity. The livelihoods of the nematode and the pine it attacks and the fungus that tries to save it are honored within unstable assemblages as opportunities arise and old talents gain new purchase. Japan's Matsutake enters the fray of all this history. Its fate depends on the enhancement or deliberation of the Uexküllian agilities of pine wilt nematodes. Tracking Matsutake through the journeys of the nematodes allows me to return to my question about telling the adventures of landscapes, this time with a thesis. First, rather than limit our analyses to one creature at a time, including humans, or even one relationship. If we want to know what makes a place livable, we should be studying polyphonic assemblages, gatherings of way of being. Assemblages are performances of livability. Matsutake stories draw us into pine stories and nematode stories. In their moments of coordination with each other, they create livable or killing situations.
Second, species-specific agilities are honed in the coordinations of assemblages. Uksku gets us on the right track by noticing how even humble creatures participate in making worlds. To extend his insights, we must follow multi-species attunements in which each organism comes into its own. Matsutake is nothing without the rhythms of the Matsutake forest. Third, coordinations come in and out of existence through the contingencies of historical change. Whether Matsutake and pine in Japan continue to collaborate depends a great deal on other collaborations set in motion by the arrival of pine wilt nematodes. To put all this together, it may be useful to recall the polyphonic music mentioned briefly in Chapter 1. In contrast to the unified harmonies and rhythms of rock, pop, or classical music, to appreciate polyphony, one must listen to both the separate melody lines and their coming together in unexpected moments of harmony or dissonance. In just this way, to appreciate the assemblage, one must attend to its separate ways of being at the same time as watching how they come together in sporadic but consequential coordinations. Furthermore, in contrast to the predictability of a written piece of music that can be repeated over and over, the polyphony of the assemblage shifts as conditions change. This is the listening practice that this section of the book attempts to instill. By taking landscape-based assemblages as my object, it is possible to attend to the interplay of many organisms' actions. I'm not limited to tracking human relations with their favored allies, as in most animal studies. Organisms don't have to show their human equivalents as conscious agents, intentional communicators, or ethical subjects to count. If we're interested in livability, impermanence, and emergence, we should be watching the action of landscape assemblages. Assemblages coalesce, change, and dissolve. This is the story.
The story of landscapes is both easy and hard to tell. Sometimes it relaxes readers into somnolescence, making us think we are not learning anything new. This is a result of the unfortunate wall we have built between concepts and stories. We can see this, for example, in the gap between environmental history and science studies. Science studies scholars, unpracticed in reading concepts through stories, don't bother with environmental history. Consider, for example, Stephen Piney's fine work on fire and the making of landscapes. Because his concepts are embedded in his histories, science studies scholars remain uninfluenced by his radical suggestions on geochemical agency. Pauline Peters' trenchant analysis on the logic of the British enclosure system came to Botswana of the logic of the British enclosure system came to Botswana range management, where Kate Shower's surprising findings about erosion control in Lesotho could revolutionize our notions of normal science, but they have not. Such refusals impoverish science studies, encouraging the play of concepts in a reified space. Distilling general principles, theorists expect that others will fill in the particulars. But filling in is never so simple. This is an intellectual apparatus that shores up the wall between concepts and stories, thus, indeed, draining the significance of the sensitivities science studies scholars try to refine. In what follows, then, I challenge readers to notice concepts and methods within the landscape histories I present.
Telling stories of landscape requires getting to know the inhabitants of the landscape, human and not human. This is not easy, and it makes sense to me to use all the learning practices I can think of, including our combined forms of mindfulness, myths, and tales, livelihood practices, archives, scientific reports, and experiments. But this hodgepodge creates suspicions, particularly indeed with the allies I hailed in reaching out to anthropologists of alternative world makings. For many cultural anthropologists, science is best regarded as a straw man against which to explore alternatives, such as indigenous practices. To mix scientific and vernacular forms of evidence invites accusations of bowing down to science. Yet this assumes a monolithic science that digests all practices into a single agenda. Instead, I offer stories built through layered and disparate practices of knowing and being. If the components clash with each other, this only enlarges what such stories can do.
At the heart of the practices I am advocating are arts of ethnography and natural history. The new alliance I propose is based on commitments to observation and fieldwork and what I call noticing, quote, human disturbed landscapes, are ideal spaces for humanist and naturalist noticing. We need to know the histories humans have made in these places and the histories of non-human participants. Satoyama restoration advocates were exceptional teachers here. They revitalized my understanding of disturbance as both coordination and history. They showed me how disturbance might initiate a story of the life of the forest. Disturbance is a change in environmental condition that causes a pronounced change in an ecosystem. Floods and fires are forms of disturbance. Humans and other living things can also cause disturbance. Disturbance can renew ecologies as well as destroy them. How terrible a disturbance is depends on many things, including scale. Some disturbances are small. A tree falls in the forest, creating a light gap. Some are huge. A tsunami knocks open a nuclear power plant. Scales of time also matter. Short-term damage may be followed by exuberant regrowth. Disturbance opens the terrain for transformative encounters, making new landscape assemblages possible. Humanists, not used to thinking with disturbance, connect the term with damage. But disturbance, as used by ecologists, is not always bad and not always human. Human disturbance is not unique in its ability to stir up ecological relations. Furthermore, as a beginning, disturbance is always in the middle of things. The term does not refer us to a harmonious state before disturbance. Disturbances follow other disturbances. Thus, all landscapes are disturbed. Disturbance is ordinary, but this does not limit the term. Raising the question of disturbance does not cut off discussion, but opens it, allowing us to explore landscape dynamics. Whether a disturbance is bearable or unbearable is a question worked out through what follows it, the reformation of assemblages.
Disturbance emerged as a key concept in ecology at the very same time that scholars in the humanities and social sciences were beginning to worry about instability and change. On both sides of the humanist naturalist line, concerns about instability followed after the post-World War II American enthusiasm for self-regulating system, a form of stability in the midst of progress. In the 1950s and 60s, the idea of ecosystem equilibrium seemed promising. Through natural succession, ecological formations were thought to reach a comparatively stable balance point. In the 1970s, however, attention turned to disruption and change, which generate the heterogeneity of the landscape. In the 1970s, too, humanists and social scientists began worrying about the transformative encounters of history, inequality, and conflict. Looking back, such coordinated changes in scholarly fashion might have been early warnings of our common slide into precarity. As an analytic tool, disturbance requires awareness of the observer's perspective, such as with the best tools in social theory. Deciding what counts as disturbance is always a matter of point of view. From a human vantage, the disturbance that destroys an anthill is vastly different from that obliterating a human city. From an ant's perspective, the stakes are different. Points of view also vary within species. Rosalind Shaw has elegantly shown how men and women, urban and rural, and rich and poor each conceptualize floods differently in Bangladesh because they are differentially affected by rising waters. For each group, the rise exceeds what is bearable and thus becomes a flood at a different point. No single standard of assessing disturbance is possible. Disturbance matters in relation to how we live. This means we need to pay attention to the assessments through which we know disturbance. Disturbance is never a matter of yes or no. Disturbance refers to an open-ended range of unsettling phenomena. Where is the line that marks off too much? With disturbance, this is always a problem of perspective, based in turn on ways of life.
Since it is already infused with attention to perspective, I am unapologetic about my use of the term disturbance to refer to the distinctive ways the concept is used in varied places. I learned this layered usage from Japanese forest managers and scientists who constantly stretch European and American conventions, even as they use them. Disturbance is a good tool with which to begin the inconsistent layering of global and local, expert and vernacular knowledge layers I have promised. Disturbance brings us into heterogeneity, a key lens for landscapes. Disturbance creates patches, each shaped by diverse conjunctures. Conjunctures may be initiated by non-living disturbance, e.g. floods and fires, or by living creatures' disturbances. As organisms make intergenerational living spaces, they redesign the environment. Ecologists call the effects that organisms create on their environments ecosystems engineering. A tree holds boulders in its root that otherwise might be swept away by a stream. An earthworm enriches the soil. Each of these is an example of ecosystems engineering. If we look at the interactions across many acts of ecosystems engineering, patterns emerge: organizing assemblages, unintentional design. This is the sum of the biotic and abiotic ecosystems engineering, intended and unintended, beneficial, harmful, and of no account within a patch.
Species are not always the right units for telling the life of the forest. The term multi-species is only a stand-in for moving beyond human exceptionalism. Sometimes individual organisms make drastic interventions, and sometimes much larger units are more able to show us historical action. This is the case, I find, for oaks and pines, as well as matsutake. Oaks, which interbreed readily and with fertile results all across species lines, confuse our dedication to species. But of course, what units one uses depends on the story one wants to tell. To tell the story of matsutake forests forming and dissolving across continental shifts and glaciation events, I need pines as a protagonist in all their marvelous diversity. Pinus is the most common matsutake host. When it comes to oaks, I stretch even further, embracing lithocarpus, tan oaks, and castanopsis, chinquapin, as well as quercus oaks. These closely related genera are the most common broadleaf hosts for matsutake. My oaks, pines, and matsutake are thus not identical within their group. They spread and transform their storylines like humans in diaspora. This helps me see the action in the story of assemblage. I follow their spread, noticing the worlds they make, rather than forming an assemblage because they're a certain type. My oaks, pines, and matsutake become themselves an assemblage.
Traveling with this in mind, I investigated matsutake forests in 4 places: Central Japan, Oregon, USA, Yunnan, Southwest China, and Lapland, Northern Finland. My small immersions in Satoyama restoration helped me see that foresters in each place had different ways of doing forests. In contrast to Satoyama, humans were not part of the forest assemblages in matsutake management in the United States and China. Managers there leapt to anxieties about too much human disturbance, not too little. In contrast to Satoyama work, forestry elsewhere was measured on the yardstick of rational advancement. Could the forest make futures in scientific and industrial productivity? In distinction, a Japanese Satoyama aims for a livable here and now. But more than comparison, I seek histories through which humans, Matsutake and pine, create forests. I work the conjunctures to raise unanswered research questions rather than to create boxes. I look for the same forest in different guises. Each appears through the shadows of the others. Exploring this simultaneously single and multiple formation, the next 4 chapters take me into pines. Each illustrates how ways of life develop through coordination in disturbance. As ways of life come together, patch-based assemblages are formed. Assemblages, I show, are scenes of considering livability, the possibility of common life on a human disturbed earth. Precarious living is always an adventure.
Okay, so that's the end of chapter 11. I think we're gonna maybe just read for a little bit further. And we'll be jumping back rather than into next week. And for anybody who's like losing their mind and going, oh no, I didn't read that section, that's okay. We wanted to highlight this part of the book. And Singh often talks about how this book is kind of like a flourish of mushrooms. You can really just jump in and enjoy any section at any time. So we're going to be jumping back just to do a little bit more reading. I think it's page 17, Jaime. Cool. 1. Arts of noticing. I am not proposing a return to the Stone Age. My intent is not reactionary, nor even conservative, but simply subversive. It seems that the utopian imagination is trapped, like capitalism and industrialism and the human population, in a one-way future consisting only of growth. All I'm trying to do is figure out how to put a pig on the tracks. Ursula K. Le Guin. In 1908 and 1909, 2 railroad entrepreneurs raced each other to build the track along Oregon's Deschutes River. The goal of each was to be the first to create an industrial connection between the towering ponderosas of the Eastern Cascades and the stacked lumber yards of Portland. In 1910, the thrill of competition yielded to an agreement for joint service. Pine logs poured out of the region, bound for distant markets. Lumber mills brought new settlers. Towns sprung up as mill workers multiplied. By the 1930s, Oregon had become the nation's largest producer of timber. This is a story we know. It is the story of pioneers' progress and transformation of, quote, empty spaces into industrial resource fields. In 1989, a plastic spotted owl was hung in effigy on an Oregon logging truck. Environmentalists had shown that unsustainable logging was destroying the Pacific Northwest forest. The spotted owl was like the canary in the coal mine, explained one advocate. It was symbolic of an ecosystem on the verge of collapse. When a federal judge blocked old growth logging to save owl habitat, loggers were furious. But how many loggers were there? Logging jobs had dwindled as timber companies mechanized, and as prime timber disappeared. By 1989, many mills had already closed. Logging companies were moving to other regions. The Eastern Cascades, once a hub of timber wealth, were now cut over forests and former mill towns overgrown by brush. This is a story we need to know. Industrial transformation turned out to be a bubble of promise, followed by lost livelihoods and damaged landscapes. And yet, such documents are not enough. If we end the story with decay, we abandon all hope, or turn our attention to other sites of promise and ruin. Promise and ruin.
What emerges in damaged landscapes beyond the call of industrial promise and ruin? By 1989, something else had begun in Oregon's cut over forests, the wild mushroom trade. From the first, it was linked to worldwide ruination. The 1986 Chernobyl disaster had contaminated Europe's mushrooms, and traders had come to the Pacific Northwest for supplies. When Japan began importing matsutake at high prices, just as jobless Indo-Chinese refugees were settling in California, the trade went wild. Thousands rushed to Pacific Northwest forests for the new, quote, white gold. This was in the middle of a jobs versus the environment battle over the forests, yet neither side noticed the mushroomers. Job advocates imagined only wage contracts for healthy white men, the foragers, disabled white veterans, Asian refugees, Native Americans, and undocumented Latinos were invisible interlopers. Conservationists were fighting to keep human disturbance out of the forests. The entry of thousands of people, had it been noticed, would hardly have been welcome. But the mushroom hunters were mainly not noticed. At most, the Asian presence sparked local fears of invasion. Journalists worried about violence. A few years into the new century, the idea of a trade-off between jobs and the environment seemed less convincing. With or without conservation, there were fewer jobs in the 20th century sense in the United States. Besides, it seemed much more likely that the environmental damage would kill all of us off, jobs or no jobs. We are stuck with the problem of living despite economic and ecological ruination. Neither tales of progress nor of ruin tell us how to think about collaborative survival. It is time to pay attention to mushroom picking. Not that this will save us, but it might open up our imaginations.
Geologists have begun to call our time the Anthropocene, the epoch in which human disturbance outranks other geological forces. As I write, the term is still new and still full of promising contradictions. Thus, although some interpreters see the name as implying the triumph of humans, the opposite seems more accurate. Without planning or intention, humans have made a mess of our planet. Furthermore, despite the prefix anthropo, that is human, the mess is not a result of our species' biology. The most convincing Anthropocene timeline begins with our species, but begins not with our species, but rather with the advent of modern capitalism, which has directed long-distance destruction of landscapes and ecologies. This timeline, however, makes the anthropo even more of a problem. Imagining the human since the rise of capitalism entangles us with ideas of progress and with the spread of techniques of alienation that turn both humans and other beings into resources. Such techniques have segregated humans and policed identities, obscuring collaborative survival. The concept of Anthropocene both evokes this bundle of aspiration, which one might call the modern human conceit, and raises the hope that we might muddle beyond it. Can we live inside this regime of the human and still exceed it? This is the predicament that makes me pause before offering a description of mushrooms and mushroom pickers. The modern human conceit won't let a description be anything more than a decorative footnote. This anthropo blocks attention to patchy landscapes, multiple temporalities, and shifting assemblages of humans and non-humans, the very stuff of collaborative survival. In order to make mushroom picking a worthwhile tale, then, I must first chart the work of this anthropo and explore the terrain it refuses to acknowledge.
Consider indeed the question of what is left. Given the effectiveness of state and capitalist devastation of natural landscapes, we might ask why anything outside their plans is alive today. To address this, we will need to watch unruly edges. What brings mine and Matsutake together in Oregon? Such seemingly trivial queries might turn everything around to put unpredictable encounters at the center of things. We hear about precarity in the news every day. People lose their jobs or get angry because they never had them. Gorillas and river porpoises hover at the edge of extinction. Rising seas swamp whole Pacific islands. But most of the time, we imagine such precarity to be an exception to how the world works. It's what drops out from the system. What if, as I'm suggesting, precarity is the condition of our time? Or, to put it another way, what if our time is ripe for sensing precarity? What if precarity, indeterminacy, and what we imagine as trivial are the center of the systematicity we seek? Precarity is the condition of being vulnerable to others. Unpredictable encounters transform us. We are not in control, even of ourselves. Unable to rely on a stable structure of community, we are thrown into shifting assemblages, which remake us as well as our others. We can't rely on the status quo. Everything is in flux, including our ability to survive. Thinking through precarity changes social analysis. A precarious world is a world without teleology. Indeterminacy, the unplanned nature of time, is frightening. But thinking through precarity makes it evident that indeterminacy also makes life possible. The only reason all this sounds odd is that most of us were raised on dreams of modernization and progress. These frames sort out those parts of the present that might lead to the future. The rest are trivial. They drop out of history. I imagine you talking back. Progress? That's an idea from the 19th century. The term progress, referring to a general state, has become rare. Even 20th century modernization has begun to feel archaic. But their categories and assumptions of empowerment are with us everywhere. We imagine their objects every day. Democracy, growth, science, hope. Why would we expect economies to grow and sciences to advance? Even without explicit reference to development, our theories of history are embroiled in these categories. So too are our personal dreams. I'll admit it's hard for me to even say this. There might not be a collective happy ending. Then why bother getting up in the morning?
I'll take it there. Thanks everybody for reading. So I'll begin with some just reflections from this week's reading, and then I'll give the reading questions again, and then we can all have a nice discussion. So this week had me really reflecting on kind of what Singh was talking about, the need to blend all sorts of forms of knowing, both myth and legend, histories, but also reports, analysis, and archive. As a scientist myself, I've really struggled with this aspect. I think it's a problem in science about getting so data-driven and really losing the story and other forms of knowledge, not just as something that can relate to other people, but as equally valid forms of knowledge. And I think some of my favorite people who work with landscape follow this pattern like Singh does, where they sort of blend the people of the land, the histories of the land, and also the science of it. So I just thought that was like extremely powerful to me. And then also just the challenge of how do we tell stories about land? And I oftentimes find myself telling stories about land through the perspective of, for me, mycelium, and kind of not just as in a technical way, but really imagining their excitement and their agency in land. So, okay. I will reread and repost the questions. So the first question is, given that disturbance is a part of ecology, can you share your observation where disturbance has been restorative? The second question is, how do we tell stories about landscapes? Third question is, have you created stories about landscapes you encounter? Who are the protagonists, both human and non-human? Fourth question is, Anna Singh is telling a story with mushrooms and nematodes as protagonists. Who is a non-human protagonist either you weave a story with or would like to see a story told about?
I did some nature journaling in my backyard, and I live up against a piece of land that's wild. So one day while I was journaling about what I was noticing, I noticed a deer. And so I guess I felt like the deer became part of my journaling and my story that I was writing. It wasn't like a fantasy story. It was just sort of what I noticed. But anyway, that's what it felt like. It felt like a story because the deer visited.
Thank you for sharing.
I have a silly one. I have some chard growing in my yard in a pot. And it's been coming back from year to year. And I really wish that the Chard would write a story about how it does that, because it goes back, it goes down to the ground and there's nothing. And then all of a sudden, obviously in the spring and in the summer, it's kind of cyclical. And in the fall, it comes back. Same chart. It's been just living. So I just want someone to write a story, or the Chard to write the story.
I'm sure there's an exhilarating one behind it. I don't know what it is, but it's got to be.
What did you say? What did you
Sorry,
say?
I just said I'm sure there's a really exciting story behind it that I want to know too.
I know. And I wonder how long it will live too. But it's great chart.
So about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, I had such an incredible experience. I was in the LA River, and I was in the LA River with some heavy demolition equipment. And we cut about 60 feet of concrete out of the LA River. And we removed it in big triangle sections. Each section weighed as much as a Mack truck. And we removed maybe 50 of those sections over a period of a week. And when we lifted it, you could almost hear a kind of pop, like the kind of pop you usually associate with celebrations, like champagne or something. And we looked in the hole and we could see gravel, which was of course the base that was just below the concrete. But when we lifted the concrete triangles up, you could see that the contours of the concrete on the bottom were sculpted by water. And it occurred to me that underneath the massive amounts of concrete of the LA River was a river, is a river. And that river has been flowing for all of this time. Generations of people have come and gone and talked about the river. But underneath the LA River is a real river, not a flood control strategy we call a river, but a real river. And when we made this thin cut in order to put pipes in there, in order to make space, we got big shovels, and those shovels came up out of the ground with rocks, with silt, with boulders, with water, with all kinds of things still living in them. And in the last year, we've celebrated that floodplain, that pre-concretized river that still exists right under our feet, and recognize that possibly the most important thing that we've learned as a studio from bending the river back into the city has been that there's a floodplain underneath our feet, a massive, vital floodplain that has the power to regenerate itself with only adding sunlight. So after this 1 year of holding that floodplain in our studio's arms, we are finding the seeds that are springing right back into life, especially sunflower and some very obscure clover that hasn't been seen in Los Angeles for more than 50, 60, 70 years. Willow, mule fat, various sages. So seeds are present right there, buried under the concrete. And it's all full of mycelium. And with very little effort, we've been able to observe how the mycelium plant kingdoms are re-meeting each other and rejoicing and re-enchanting everything that it touches. And yet, when you look at it with kind of construction worker eyes or city of LA eyes, what it looks like is rubble, which should just be moved as quickly as possible to the dump. So one of the great challenges has been language, to be able to say it's alive and that this is a massive, massive field, way bigger than the LA River. Like pretty much everything that exists between Elysian Park and say Mount Washington is all like that. So that would be an example for me of a story about a non-human protagonist, the floodplain of the LA River, that despite our unintentional desire to suffocate it, has probably been protected by the concrete from the rapid industrialization of LA. Because it's only now that we're uncorking some tiny small bit of it that we realize how vital and alive it is. And maybe we wouldn't have understood how precious it is and how life-giving if it hadn't been lost to our eyes for nearly a century.
Thank you for sharing, Lauren. I can just feel your enthusiasm coming digitally through the screen.
To share an example of much more recent disturbance ecology, about 25 minutes ago, there was a 6.6 earthquake on the east coast of Japan, not far from the Fukushima Daiichi power plant.
Wow.
I get these announcements on my phone. I was like, where is this? It's like, oh, wow. 6.6 is not as intense as the 8 point something that destroyed that power plant. But it's interesting that it's just happened in the same region.
Wow. Hmm.
Well, maybe this is a good moment for me to share some more moving mushrooms. What do you guys think?
Moving mushrooms?
We can't say no to moving mushrooms.
Twist my arm a little, Jaime.
Ooh. Wow.
Yay. I have a protagonist that I think about. Well, I always have a lot, but I have one in particular, which is it's an avocado tree that is at kind of my grandparents' family home that my grandfather planted when he migrated to the US from Mexico. And it's a place where I like, it's a huge tree. It gives like hundreds every year. And it's just got like its own area where there's like thickets of just layers of avocado leaves and stuff like that. So there's a lot of like decay and whatnot underneath. I remember like kind of going there as a kid and like turning things over and seeing all the different bugs and spiders and even mycelium. I think that was like the first place where I encountered that. But I oftentimes, yeah, would like to know the story of it and all the pollinators that it interacts with, and all the things and people it's seen. It's seen me grow up. It's seen my family grow up. It's watched, and like, you know, maybe it's contentious relationship with squirrels, or maybe it's not contentious. And even the history of where it came from, because it, like my grandfather was also a migrant. Yeah.
I love that story. And I don't know, I have to say I'm always a little bit of a rooter for those kind of moving plants. And I have to say, you know, whenever I see a little volunteer tomato growing in the middle of a sidewalk, I always have to give it a little bit of a cheer, and just to think about, you know, how does that sort of move along, or unusual spaces. I used to live in San Diego, and there's a bunch of canyons that have informed kind of the formation of the space there. And there was a bridge that, you know, people used to throw various things off of, including pumpkins and tomatoes, to see them splat. And you would always see these really, you know, interesting things growing in the middle of this canyon, from pumpkins to tomatoes. And, you know, just thinking about this sort of hardiness and journey of those things that come. And I always sort of think of them, these kind of feral plants and vegetables and whatnot.
Well, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. I like that, and I think about my front yard. There's this little patch of dirt around a tree, and there are often ants in the dirt. And I think about how, like, at first I looked at the patch of dirt and thought, oh, just a little patch. And then I thought about the ants and how it's kind of a whole mountain range to them. And like, we have these massive mountain ranges we look at as humans, and there are these ants going over these dips and like trails, and it's this massive space, and just, it's really fun to think about what it'd be like to be an ant. I think it would be kind of fun.
I really like the passage about the notion of disturbance seen from the living system point of view, not from the human point of view. And it's interesting, we mentioned you know, nuclear disasters, and also I'm thinking about fires. Fires are not always initiated by people, even though we create the condition, but it's a naturally occurring phenomenon, versus you know, Fukushima and other nuclear disaster. And I'm thinking that often both what is caused by nature or caused by humans. If you remove the human from the equation, or from being the most important beings, then those two type of disturbance, nuclear and fires, they kind of produce similar result at the end. Yes, some living system will be affected, but others are going to take over and replace the void created. And I like the fact that, stepping back, both as actors on the stage or just as observers, help us understand that yes, indeed, a disturbance causes condition just for system to take over. And I think it's a good idea to just take a step back. It's a very healthy way of looking at nature.
Yeah, Misha, I was really moved by that part as well. Something that I also really liked in the book, or this chapter, was the kind of talk about how disturbance ecology emerged as like well, not emerged, but, we found out about it, which was, we were looking for the same kind of stability and sense of progress we wanted to build in society. We were looking for that in natural systems, and it just it was like, that's not the case at all, really. And I think it lends to this idea, even, kind of like realizing myself, like, in my upbringing, having this conception of like nature as being like super stable and like nothing changes, and that can be the case in some parts, and that's really important. But also, within even just one patch of, like 10 square feet, so much change occurs, and things are still there, and they're constantly in flux. It's just like a river. It even though things stick around for longer than water does, ultimately it completely changes. So disturbance is everywhere in a sense.
Yeah,
And there is no staticness. Sorry.
And it's essential too, just that, thinking about where we live and thinking about, just even, the manzanita, right, that needs to burn in order to generate, and, even the nature of rivers, how they move. I think, just knowing that it moves over time and space, and the path that we see now is not the path it always took, and the floodplain, and, just that is kind of how spaces generate and become fertile in these sort of cycles.
Can I share one more thing?
Yeah.
Thanks. We were listening to this audiobook. It's a book called The End of Everything. And it's basically taking disturbance ecology to everything, like not just the earth, but everything that we know is in flux and in a precarious condition. And so it's a book by a science writer that I found on the New York Times list of best science books, or best books full stop, in 2020. And it's so mind-boggling. I almost don't understand anything that she's talking about, but just that she can describe these things is such a really great example of how like how mind-blowing it is, almost like to think about time-lapsing everything we know. Like our lives are so short, so we can only really talk about the things that we experience in the course of our lifetimes in a sort of fluent way. But it made me think about this vast stretch of land that enchants my imagination between the Rockies and the Eastern Sierra, this area we call the Great Basin. That's so hard to imagine, but a long, long time ago, the Great Basin was an inland sea. So everything between the Eastern Sierra and the Western Rockies was an inland ocean. And it was changed entirely by a massive earthquake that created a massive rift, which became the Columbia River. And all of that water flowed out to sea because it used to be contained. But what was left even then was this network of cascading glacial lakes that moved from the snowpack of the Rockies and the Sierra all the way through the Great Basin, creating this massive water table underneath the Great Basin. And when I've read about the kind of geological and biological and plantological, what's the right word? Reality of it, it's also incredibly rich and abundant, but just farther spaced out. Things grow, you know, in a different sense of proportionality to the water it has, but still it's also still abundant. But when you're driving through there, or walking through there, you can really feel that each of these glacial lake basins have a completely different feeling one to the next. That kind of sense that all of these basins had whole stories, whole ecosystems, whole patch assembly, you know, the assemblages of patch ecologies that aren't there in our eye at the moment, but were definitely there before. So when I try and, you know, think like from Izzy's story about ants and thinking about the minutia being a universe and being as small as an ant, the same can also be true of being able to live for millennia, so that you, like in Jaime's time lapse, could actually see the transformation of vast stretches of a continent that completely don't organize themselves around these bizarre boundaries that we have somehow all decided are real, like the bizarre boundary that goes through the Great Lakes between Canada and the United States. Like, how did we figure out that that was like somehow a real thing? Anyway, I don't know if that rambling made any sense, but it's sort of brought on by the time lapse and recognizing that the story of becoming a place is largely about the ability to imagine vast stretches of time and the networks of disturbance ecologies. Like, again, just to go back to the Great Basin and our last reading series when we read Savage Dreams, right? Is that in mid-century modern thinking, in the middle of the 20th century, when they were trying to figure out where the least worst place to practice bombing, atom bombing was, they decided the Great Basin was the least worst place. And they decided it because they said there's nothing there. Right? So I think that's really, really fascinating, you know, that the disturbance ecology of an earthquake millennia ago created the context for the removal of an inland sea, the formation of a river, and then the change of the literal shape and contour of a place that from a satellite made it look like nothing was there. So we added another level of man-made disturbance ecology like atom bomb testing, which has now created uranium rivers that flow into the Gulf of Mexico, which create the disturbance ecology that we're seeing with the death of the oceans. So, and all of these things are invisible to the eye. So I think your question, James, about how do we tell the story of landscape and non-human landscapes in such a way that it isn't just for scientists, but it's about you know, cosmology and it places us as earthlings in an ever expanding and contracting network of universes that are experiencing all kinds of precarity that is the condition of life, that is life.
Amen. Yeah, I really like that. Like, what's the saying about people? It's that we live long enough to like be aware of time, but we don't live long enough to like actually see change, or something like that. I probably butchered it, but yeah, I think like you were just saying, Lauren, I think Seeing also talks about like we have to have like a quantum view of time, like that as particles like move back and forwards through past, present, and future. We must also be able to kind of have this large scope noticing of where landscapes have been, where they are now, and where they're going to be.
Some of this is making me think about something that you said earlier, Lauren, about language not being able to maybe tell or express the complexity of that vast of a story. And I think that's where the idea of a polyphonic assemblage, or in the case of music, is exciting, or other modes of expression, and the way that maybe that can capture the complexity and nuance of the story more aptly than words, which, so often fall short.
Yeah, it like has to become almost like a listening that we need to learn about harmony and dissonance, collective and singular.
I met this, I was in Vermont last summer, and I gave this hitchhiker, backpacker a ride to his car, and he was telling me about how he makes violins, and he works with this medium to make particular sounds with the violins that can be useful for different things. So for example, they have this one, like they go into trance together and they make noises together, and there's this one noise that like they listen to, or he listens to particularly before he goes in the woods, so that it changes the frequency in his body to repel ticks, for example, is one of them. But then there's other things, like people will come to him and say, hey, I'm having a problem with my liver, and he'll work with this medium, they go into trance together with a session with the client, and they create these vibrations and frequencies all together that then are catered to like healing that part of the liver or whatever the ailment may be. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I don't really know if this is relevant, but it felt kind of like a polyphonic assemblage.
I think so. And I think also like Singh is saying, like we have to be more open to all sorts of different ways of knowing and knowledge systems and epistemology. Like I think you were saying, both you and Lauren, like, mythology really fits well into, like, myth does the job where like language struggles to, it kind of like reaches beyond like strict meaning. And I think that's like good to apply to kind of like all of our senses. Even science is in a way like it's not a exact representation of something. And so just an openness to different ways of being extraordinary and mundane is really important.
Yeah, and how also like what is, I believe, being disturbed in this contemporary time is also energies. Like there's disturbances of energy and this chaotic flux of energy that go through the modern era, and how maybe then like sound is energy, frequency, sound waves are, energy, frequency, and how that does seem like something that is a logical way of dealing with the disturbed energy that we have in our present day. Like it does make sense logically too.
I mean, one of the questions was about stories about landscapes and so the world. If you look at myth and mythology, I mean, there's nothing about permanency, but all about disturbance, and how things are created is through chaos and rearrangement. So you can see disturbance as rearrangement, but are not always comfortable for humans. They are never comfortable. And myth and mythologies are for us a way to explain, to make sense of all those things happening. And we create those disturbances all the time. We just don't see them as disturbance because they are minimal. When they are very large, and then we leave them as religion, as catastrophes, but disturbance is permanently a rearrangement, a perpetual rearrangement of our world. And it's very difficult for us to understand that our scale. So I think that was a good question about the stories about landscape. Yes, it's all here. It's all about rearrangement.
Would anyone like to share what they are working on or have made progress? I can share. I finished the orange in my design. Well, I'm actually going to still do some more orange in here, but
Here's my bird. I'm just doing I think this is just the, what are they? Leaves.
you made some progress.
I did.
Wait, Cindy, which pattern is that?
This one is the yellow rumped warbler.
Oh, wow, look at that.
It's on a manzanita tree.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Thank you.
I love how you've started with the inside of the leaf, like the leaf veins.
Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know. We'll see how it turns out. But thank you.
I didn't make very much progress, but I'm enjoying it.
Hold on, Lauren. I'm gonna pin you. Ooh. I love how you colored it in.
Yeah, I do too.
Thank you. I saw a lot of ravens this morning in Lone Pine. There's so many that live at the studio's house there. And they look like little kids playing, running through the streets in the air. Like they have no conscious interest in what we're up to. They're just kind of chasing around and kind of squawking. They're so incredible.
It's a crow. I saw a crow by my house not that long ago. And I was watching it just sitting on like a ledge. And as the sun was hitting it, I could see the different shades of like blues and purples. And I never really looked at them before, but they're actually really beautiful. The colors are very pretty.
Not a raven story, but my cat made like contact with a crow this morning that was staring at her through the window. And my cat is like she's not really that like prey driven. She only eats like cockroaches, but like birds she doesn't care about. But it was really interesting because they were just standing in front of each other, kind of like staring at each other. Yeah, not really relevant, but I thought I'd share. I thought it was really interesting.
I'm gonna have to jump off, but I just want to say thank you. It was really nice to meet all of you in this space, and thank you for reading the stories to us. Take care.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
I really love the passage, James. Thank you so much. I think that her definition and description of disturbance ecology is really, really good. And it's interesting for me, like how much my brain resists thinking of disturbance as anything but something to try and avoid, even with language. So it's a really interesting kind of term, disturbance and ecology. I immediately rebel against it, and just reading it over and over again, that like, you know, actually biodiversity relies on it. It's really fascinating. I'm wondering, I kind of want to know whether it sounds the same in different languages.
Yeah.
What would disturbance be in Spanish? There are no disturbances in Spanish.
I'm not sure what the word is for it. Jaime, can you help?
I think he's looking it up.
He's cheating, no fair.
I'm cheating. Yeah, it says disturbio, but I don't know. Doesn't sound. La alteración. That could be alteration. I mean, that's something different. Yeah. I guess el disturbio.
I'm
sounds
getting
similar.
ecología de perturbación.
That's what I got.
Perturbación.
Perturbación. Yeah.
Perturbación. Yeah.
Perturbación. Many different ways of saying it.
Yeah. Yeah, Lauren, I definitely get what you mean. Like kind of like your sensibilities, like at least for me, you know, the schooling in America that I've gotten definitely kind of rebels against it a little bit. And like even things that you are like, you know, gardens or like patches of land that you really care for, you know, sometimes like disturbance is like exactly what like needs to happen to like, you know, yeah, to further life and spur biodiversity. But again, it's still like a really tricky thing it's very nuanced, you know, it might not even be within our lifetimes that we know that was a great idea or a terrible one, which is why it's so important to like, I think, pay attention to histories and all sorts of different ways of knowing.
Do you think when you get something to grow somewhere where there was nothing growing before, that would be considered disturbance?
It could be, I don't know if it's exactly that, but there are like certain species that really like to grow in disturbance. I know, for example, morel mushrooms, which we actually had at the Metabolic Studio one season, grow like strictly where there's only gravel, and like on the very edge condition, like they really don't like the where they grew was all along like a gravel road and basically as far as they could be from any kind of water or like compost or mulch. So those are definitely growing in like a, they're an example of a species that really enjoy like fire or very like poor mineral soil. So I don't know if that answers the question.
If there was a human that liked major disturbance like you're describing for the morels, what kind of life would they be leading? Would it be radical and unusual? And
I mean, maybe it's a phase of all development. Maybe that's what we like to call the terrible twos. You know, maybe it's developmentally part of everything. So I don't know. As soon as you said that, I had this idea of a universe full of toddlers running around just like saying no.
And we'll say no.
I think that's a tricky one, because I think you have to kind of go back to like seeing this idea of like, I think, what I'm thinking that, I think of the mushroom hunters that she talks about, right? That they're finding these disturbed landscapes. And so like, it's hard to like really isolate a person because so much of it is connected to where they get food and what kind of like environment they're in, what kind of economy they're in. So I think there are people who, there definitely are humans that are making livelihoods and even just surviving in disturbed landscapes. I mean, a really snarky part of me wants to say like, settler colonial society is disturbed, are disturbed humans are disturbing in that sense.
I mean, I think it's a really good question, Sylvia, and very thought-provoking to think about the systems we live with. I mean, a lot of the readings that we've been doing have really talked about, the gestalt of capitalism. And I think that the capitalist gestalt is by nature a form of disturbance ecology, because it has implied in it endless resources that are for the production of what we want, with very little thought about giving back to the web of life. So it's an interesting kind of thing to sort of take, what would the world look like if we decided to leave the disturbance ecology to life on life's terms rather than enact it? How would that change things? And as Singh says, it probably wouldn't change things much, but at least by studying something like a mushroom, it sensitizes you to this idea that there is organisms that thrive on the ruins that we've made, and that opens all kinds of conscious doors. I think it's a really good question to try and think about it, and comes back to James's question about how do we tell stories about the landscape? Because it's much easier to tell stories about a disturbance ecology if you could create a character who was the disturber. I think about Citizen Kane or something like that, like could you analyze like a character. Could you, Sylvia, kind of, who would you come up with if you picked a person that kind of emblematically is like a personification of disturbance ecology?
Yeah, I kind of landed on a really radical artist who was just out there making things and disturbing human normalcy that needs disturbing anyway. You know, when I first saw the words that are the title of this, I didn't read it as something living. I read it as human lives. And so it made it very different. Let me look at the title of this. What is the title of this? What lives in the ruins we've made is what you said. But what I read it as was, what lives in the ruins we've made? So what are our lives in the ruins that we've made?
Well, it's interesting to think of COVID-19 as a kind of form of disturbance ecology.
Yeah, there's like, I'm sure there's going to be scientific papers and studies, or at least just stories at that as well, of what happens because of all the results of, you know, masks, but also like less people driving. You know, emissions went down, but even though the climate is still high in CO2, but yeah, that stuff is like all coming in like 2022. You know, people notice it now from stories and stuff like that, and there's noticing going on, but I'm just imagining in 2022, like some story about how masks affected this, or the fact that freeways were less traveled maybe had a benefit on other things because of the disturbance of COVID-19. Yes, Izzy, the psychological implications of no hugging are going to be huge.
Dad, oh, thanks, Mom.
Oh,
Mom, don't embarrass me.
all right. Well, I've got to run to go make dinner. I have some dinner plans, but thank you, everybody. This was another incredible week.
You could just take us with you, James.
Just come into the kitchen.
Sounds good. I'm in. Where do I go?
We'll help. We'll just keep chatting, you know. The Zoom platform as a form of disturbance ecology, domestic disturbance.
Yeah, exactly. Culinary disturbance.
All right. Well, thank you for a wonderful selection. I look forward to next week.
Yes, likewise. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
See you next
Good
week.
night.
Bye-bye.
Good night. We'll see you all next time.